Do you have the feeling you're not really being heard by the rest of the team? As your manager told you, if you want to grow to the next level in your career, you need to work on your communication skills. Are you afraid you'll become an insincere person if you learn a new communication style? Do you often get into heated debates which end in frustration for you, the other party, or both of you? In this video, I have 9 tips to address the causes of these things happening. Let's talk about effective communication. I'd like to start with 2 definitions because I'll be using those throughout my video. I'd like to start with empathy. Empathy is understanding and entering into another person's feelings. It's derived from ancient Greek. It means to suffer with. If you empathize, you build up trust. With more trust, you can make more mistakes and you will be forgiven for this. You will have a more easier time. Your communication will be more effective because the other will be more inclined to actually listen to you. The next one is psychological safety. Psychological safety is the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. The higher the psychological safety in a conversation, the more productive the conversation is. The first lesson is to not be afraid of learning new communication, to change your communication style. Communication styles are not who you are, they're not your identity, they're not your personality. They may be how others perceive you, but it's like a toolbox. You have one tool in it right now, you could have multiple tools in there. If you are in different situations, you can decide which tool matches this situation best, which communication style would get you effective communication. If you have somebody, maybe a loved one, for example, that is crying, that is in need of attention, then a specific tool like empathy and listening and suffering with them is a very effective communication style then. Why would you not apply these kind of things to your work? Why would you not have multiple situations and multiple tools and you try and mix and match the tools to the situation, thereby becoming more effective, you deciding and being in control of how you want to communicate. The second lesson is that there's no good or bad communication. There's only effective and ineffective communication. You're either heard and understood or you're not. Every communication style has its place. Sometimes it's effective to become a bit angry, but often it's not. And it's good here to have multiple tools in your toolbox, thereby having the ability to choose what style of communication you want to have right now so that you can be effective, instead of being subservient to the only one tool that you have. Yes, you can get a screw into the wall with a hammer, but you're gonna hurt the screw and the wall. Practicing effective communication is the act of matching communication styles to conversation situations. Having said that, there are some general rules you can apply to all situations. They're great to start with. The next lesson is to listen to others and to give them all the space they need. Make sure you are not the loudest voice in the room. You want to allow for the other's opinion, point of views, and especially emotions if they're there. You can't move forward without acknowledging the emotion first, without having shown to the other, I have heard you, because the other will just keep on repeating the same point until they have been acknowledged. You also have to allow for a situation where you could be wrong. Listening is being able to learn. Listening is acknowledging to yourself, I am open to the fact that I could be wrong. Convince me if I am wrong, then if my argument isn't good enough, then I cannot stand my ground. That is okay. In that case, I want to learn. In that case, I want to grow. I want to allow for my own growth. I want to hear you out. And if it turns out you were right and the other was wrong, then you will still have growth because you have listened to the other. You have won their respect. You have shown respect for them. Listening and giving space can also be applied to a larger group. If there's multiple people in the room, make sure everybody gets their say. Make sure everybody has the time and feels the space to be able to speak up with their concerns. Another very important lesson is to make it a rule to never interrupt people. When you interrupt people, you'll pay with your credibility. You'll lose credibility when you do. It is considered very rude and disrespectful. One of the most effective things you can do in communication is active listening. You're giving respect to the other person by letting them finish their sentence, and you're hearing them out. You're understanding them probably in a better way than if you would interrupt them. Interruption is the opposite of listening. It's even worse. You're not only not listening, you're also actively, by interrupting, you're actively saying, stop speaking. You're signaling, you are not okay, I am better. Interruption for me is a show of being powerless. If your point, the point you're trying to make while you're interrupting somebody, if it's so good, why wouldn't you be able to wait? Why would the point stand on itself after the person has finished speaking? Why does it need an interruption? The next tip is to address the point, not the person. Addressing or attacking the person is also called ad hominem. It is undesirable behavior because it erodes the psychological safety you have in your team. It disqualifies you as a maker of valid arguments. You will, just as with the previous one, you will pay with your credibility. You will pay with your reputation. The result of this might be that people will want to work with you less. Your effectiveness will suffer. Your productivity will suffer through this. You might like your job less. You might like your colleagues less, the environment you work in. My next tip is to direct the conversation via questions instead of statements. And this can be a very powerful way. If you're in a group and everybody is fighting for certain arguments or maybe fighting for their own arguments, the conversation could be going in a certain direction. If you have a feeling that your argument is not being taken into account or there's a proposed solution on the table that doesn't solve your problem, by asking the question, but then how do we solve for your problem? You are asking the others. You are making sure somebody else will answer this question and start running with your argument. Making a statement is very obvious that you are redirecting the conversation to somebody else. They might be aware of that, they might not allow it. But by asking a question, when there's a question in a group, it's very common and people are very much inclined to answer that question. In your question, you have given a direction. You are suddenly making others go into that direction that you have hidden in your question. Not necessarily hidden, but that is intrinsic to your question. One of the best questions is why, because it will take a conversation to a deeper level. You will go to the root cause, the things that are actually mattering. It was developed at Toyota. I have an example here. If you have a broken car, you could ask 5 whys. Why the battery is dead? Why is the battery dead? The alternator is not functioning. Why the alternator belt has broken? Why the belt was well beyond its useful service life and has not been replaced? And the last why, the vehicle was not maintained according to the recommended service schedule. That is the actual root cause. You could go even further. I'm not recommending to actually say the word why 5 times in a row because people will get fed up with that. There's many ways to ask for why without actually using the word why. I think this helps a lot in getting a conversation to a level where you want it to have. Asking for why is very useful to take a conversation to a deeper level. Often conversations need that if on the level you're currently talking to, you're not actually be able to reach an agreement. If you ask for why, then maybe on that other level, on that deeper level, you will be able to see the differences. And suddenly you can say, but that argument's actually really important to me and that is not important to you at all. Maybe we should talk about that difference. And suddenly you have a very productive conversation. My next tip is to choose to have the most generous interpretation of events. When something happens that really hits you, for example, when somebody gets angry suddenly in a meeting, or when you hear a straight out, no, this is not going to happen, you can choose to interpret this in a certain way. You can try to see the other's position. You can try to suffer with the other. If there's multiple points of view, assume the most generous one. Assume they are struggling with something. Assume they are not actively attacking you. They have nothing against you. They're just passionately trying to defend something that they really believe in. Isn't that admirable in a way? Isn't their cause that they're fighting for actually also a good cause? Try to not take it personally in a way. It's not meant against me. It's just out of a certain fear or weakness they have to lash out in this certain way that isn't actually has anything to do with you. Try to first take a breath if something like that happens. Try to actively ask the why, ask for the other's viewpoint, try to empathize and listen to them. And surely most of the time the other will calm down and see the reason, because if you stay calm, if you just ask questions, then you will probably get together and find a new solution to this. If instead you would also lock down and respond with aggression or a raised voice, then you will have a much harder time actually getting to an agreement. My next tip is to remove the judgment from your communication. Don't say things that are actually not facts. Stay away from loaded questions. Don't use words, preferably not at all, things like bad or good or right or wrong. These are especially judgmental. Judgmental language is undesirable because it erodes mutual trust. You're again worsening your psychological safety. You can make a point out of learning what objectivity in language is, how it would serve you if you would say the same thing without the judgment layer on top, if you would make it more factual, if you would find a way to phrase your sentences a bit more careful. I also talk about this in my video on feedback, where I talk about the concept of how can you say something, how can you say the things that matter in a way that are factual and talking about feelings, talking about yourself in a way that you can't actually disagree with. It is completely true. And my last point is a very powerful realization. You cannot make the other change. The other has to decide for themselves. Do they want to change their point of view? Do they not want to change their point of view? You have to, by asking questions, you have to let them get there at their own pace. It only makes sense to tell them about your own point of view when they are actually listening. If they're not listening, if they're clearly unwilling to hear you out, then it's better to just stop talking. It doesn't make sense right now. It's probably best to hear them out first. After you have handed out a bit of respect, after you have handed out a bit of attention span to them, you have shown them you're willing to listen, they will probably do the same thing to you. If somebody is not listening to you and you keep on talking, you're actually worsening the relationship by showing you're actually bad at reading the other. The push model of communication doesn't work. You cannot make the other listen. You simply cannot control that. You can only control your own listening. If you are not being listened to, you should stop speaking and you should start listening instead. Give the other their turn first. And that's it. These were the things I've ran to in my career that really helped me out, the things that resonated with me. Which one did I miss? What is your rule number 10? I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or if you have an idea for a future video, please let me know in the comments and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.